Hello, my name is Lainey or Elaine, an illustrator and concept artist you may have seen on TikTok, Instagram, or Twitter. Now, I've been known to make my fair share of art tutorials on TikTok especially, but I decided I wanted to try my hand at more long-form content in order to expand on my previous tutorials and be able to get my thoughts down in a more organized way. With that being said, this video is about improving your speed at art and probably why you clicked on this video, hence the title. And with art fight upon us, I know many artists have expressed wanting to be able to create pieces faster. I know I certainly want to get faster at drawing, even now, but throughout my time drawing, I've picked up a couple tips that have helped me improve my speed over time. Even if I'm not the fastest, I've had some stuff that have helped, so I thought I'd share that. With that being said, speed is not necessarily an indicator that you're a good artist. Plenty of artists are slow and methodical. I mean, after all, the Mona Lisa wasn't painted in a day. So go at whatever pace makes you feel comfortable, and don't let other artists' speeds impact your view of your own art. That's why this video will be focusing a lot on things that can improve your drawing speed, yes, but also things that can just generally help you improve as an artist in other aspects, along with a few art hacks, of course. But first, I'd like to reiterate that I by no means consider myself an expert at art or a professor of art in any way, just someone passionate about art and someone who hopes to share my knowledge with others. So take everything with a grain of salt and don't consider what I have to say to be the end-all be-all when it comes to drawing. I mean, after all, art has no rules. I've been talking for a bit too long now, so let's just move on to the actual video with the first point. Warming up can definitely seem like a chore, and many times I had skipped this part of the process and gone straight to drawing. It's something that everyone suggests, but sometimes it feels like it really doesn't help. However, the times I did skip it, I noticed I was a lot more stiff and took longer than if I had just warmed up beforehand. What I like to do to warm up myself is to just do a few studies, looking on Pinterest or figure drawing sites like Line of Action for references, and then drawing them. The most important thing though is not taking much time on these. Warm-ups aren't really helpful if you're taking like an hour on them. So set a 1 to 2 minute timer if you can, that way you don't spend too much time making each pose perfect and just trying to get the general feel of them. As you can see in some of the footage, when I warm up I try to be pretty decisive in my strokes, not getting hung up on a line being perfect and just moving on to the next. This really helps me loosen up, helping my poses stay fluid and putting myself in the mindset of not being too overcritical of myself. I mentioned this in my previous TikTok about the matter, but getting over perfectionism is one of the big hurdles an artist has to face that can significantly improve their speed. Of course, spending a lot of time on a piece is not bad, as you should enjoy the process of art over anything. However, I often see artists continue to subtly change and alter a piece thousands of times, never finishing it because they aren't satisfied. Of course, the same problem happens to me and still does. However, what I've had to learn is that sometimes you need to just let it go. Rather than spending 100 hours slightly altering a piece, you can just move on to the next and improve your art from there. With each new piece, you're learning new skills, so take what you learned and apply it to the next piece, rather than getting hung up on one. Later on, you can always go back and fix a piece that was giving you trouble. That's what I like to do in my spare time to show my growth and kind of satisfy that itch in my brain. But sometimes you're not at the skill level to fully recognize all the mistakes right away, so it's better to just come back to it way later. Another thing perfectionism can impact is your line work. We've all done the artist thing of endlessly drawing and redoing a singular line just to make sure it's absolutely perfect. And while I think chicken scratching can work for an artist, it can also lead to slower progress on a piece. What I found that helps is doing studies traditionally in pen. Not only does this work as a warm-up, but doing it in pen prevents you from erasing. Sometimes you make a wrong line and you end up having to just push past it rather than constantly redoing it. A lot of times when a sketch isn't working, I'll just redo the whole thing, and usually it goes by a lot faster and looks a lot better and more fluid than the first time. Throughout my pen studies, I've learned both to move on from my mistakes and strengthen my line confidence. That is translated to my digital art, where I make more decisive strokes and usually need less of them. That is not to say that every line you draw has to be perfect. Another thing I struggled with was mistaking line confidence for perfection. Many professional artists have a lot of searching lines in their sketches, putting down tons of strokes to see which ones fit. Instead of constantly redoing a line, don't be afraid to just place a ton and see which one fits. I mean, it's a sketch after all, so you don't need to be particularly clean. And not being so stingy with your lines can make your poses feel a lot more fluid, I've found as well. With that being said, taking steps to get out of that perfectionist mindset can really help your speed as well as just your art improve a lot in general. So finding an art process is a lot harder than it sounds, to say the least. Despite having drawn all my life, I'm still finding new ways to shade and sketch and go about drawing. But regardless, this point doesn't mean that you need to fully solidify and stick to a method of drawing. Rather, try to find a way of working that suits your needs right now. For example, back in the day I used to shade all my layers one by one. Now in the present, I just use a multiply layer over all my colors to shade, which makes my process faster and also helps me think more about the light source a lot more since it's so unified. ArtFight is actually a great way to figure out how best you like working, so I'd use this time to find out a good workflow that you enjoy, and doing so can help you draw faster in the future. My first art fight, I ended up trying something where I didn't use line art and just drew over the sketch, which I found really fun, and it actually made it a lot easier to create more pieces quicker. Now, don't feel pressured to rush into finding the way you like drawing most right away, since it will be something that changes a lot over time. But figuring out some shortcuts and simplifying your art process can make it a lot easier to create more pieces and take out a lot of the guesswork in creation. These are what I like to call art hacks, or things that can make your art seem more detailed with very minimal effort. Some people might call this cheating, but professional artists do this all the time. Professional artists know not to waste their time fully detailing everything, and in fact, often know where to add detail in order to draw the eye. For example, a lot of times artists will focus on detailing the main subject and leave the background very simplistic and vague. Zooming in on a lot of pieces, what appears to be extremely intricate is just a couple of brushstrokes. This makes sure the viewer's eye is drawn to the main subject, and also makes sure the artist doesn't spend unnecessary time fully drawing out something unimportant. So no, I don't think these things are cheating or make your work less valuable, but rather make better use of your time. Sometimes the long and hard way is not better than the quick and easy way. One thing I like doing is adding gradients to pieces. Slapping on an overlay layer or just adding gradients to flat colors can easily make a piece feel like it has more depth than it really does, and add more visual interest with the transition of colors. Another thing I like to add is texture. I love halftone and rake brushes, and even pattern brushes can seemingly add more detail to a piece without much work. This also works for a similar reason as gradients, because you're adding more visual interest with a variety of textures rather than just one. I also just enjoy adding overlays to my pieces, usually for the background. I do this a lot in my reference sheets, filling the back with overlays of newspapers or some transparent sticker overlays to make it more interesting. Font is also a fun thing to add. I love scrolling through the font for interesting fonts I can add to my piece. Not only does this work in adding more texture, but it can tell the audience a bit about your character. For example, I use newspaper overlays along with Polaroids and pins for my slasher OC, kind of reinforcing this murder mystery-esque theme, and kind of hammering home what type of character this is. The last thing I often do is adding more line variety to my line work. I use a brush with very little change in line weight. It's just a simple round brush. So what I like to do is go back after I finish my line work and add a thicker outline to the edge. I also sometimes use a lasso tool to add darker shadows in places. Again, it's all about visual interest and variety, being a lot more interesting to look at than the same line weight everywhere. This technique is something I learned from a workshop one of the lead concept artists at Blizzards taught, and it still helps me make my pieces look more interesting today. There's many other things you could likely use to give the illusion of detail, but these 4 things are mainly what I use in most of my work. It can make even a piece without shading look visually complex, and really helps when wanting to make a simple piece pop. So to hammer this home, if you're more of a visual learner and want to see it one-to-one, I'm going to go through some of my art fight pieces and show you what it looks like without some of these tips, okay? So for example, here's this piece right here. It's pretty simple, just flat colors and a basic, some basic shadows, but let me remove the multiply layer, and I also added an overlay to it, a very light overlay, and I also did some colored lines, very light colored lines, and I did a simple gradient with a soft light layer, and you can already see that it looks a lot different than the original. Even if it's very subtle, you can see with these types of things that it just adds a lot to the piece. These very small minor details add a lot. I also can remove the background, and it's even more plain than before. So you can see that these, and like the background is not much. I just added a simple yellow outline and some halftone brushes and then another copy in the background in a lighter opacity. But yeah, you can see the difference in these from the bare bones, just basic flat colors version to just adding these small things, how much of a difference that it makes. It's very subtle, but it adds a lot. Alright, now for this other one, I kind of added a lot of different overlay layers and stuff to the base colors, which is how I got this like kind of green look, because the original character's colors are like kind of black and red. I did add some stuff on top of this to make it look prettier, and I'm gonna go take that away now. First I added a levels layer just to make the green more like kind of black to fit the original character's colors. It looks a lot more green without that. Whenever I finish a piece, I just love going in with levels correction and just messing with the different levels, how much like green there is, red there is, blah 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 blah, just to balance it out. And kind of sometimes you become blind to the colors, so just going back and looking at them again can really help. This difference layer, I added a small difference layer, a red gradient, and I feel like that adds quite a bit to it, as well as this glow of this knife. I wanted to make it brighter since I wanted the lighting to be pretty harsh, as well as I have this spiral background I added, and without it I feel like it looks a lot more bare. It's the texture thing again. It just adds a lot more texture and kind of reinforces like the spotlight lighting I have going on. Added that circle spotlight. Yeah, again, even more bare without it. And honestly, if I just like, the background has a gradient, if I like took this away, it would look even more basic. So you can see a lot of the stuff I'm taking away and adding, it's very, very simple. Yeah, okay, here's the texture layer. You can see I added just a simple halftone. Taking that away also like takes away some of the visual interest of it. So here's the very, very basic version. You can really tell like I honestly just like shaded this with like a multiply layer, added some fun effects, and just kind of went over it to add some more detail. Now you can see how, yeah, these really do add a ton to the piece. It looks a lot more complex than before just from these simple touches. Well, those are my tips. Hopefully some of those resonated with you and gave you some ideas on how to improve your speed for the future. I want to reiterate again that faster is not always better, and the most important thing is just enjoying the art process. However, sometimes issues with speed come with issues of perfectionism and beating yourself over small mistakes, so learning to overcome those obstacles can improve both your speed and overall enjoyment when drawing. This is going to be my first video of hopefully many, so if there's any topics you'd like me to discuss going forward, feel free to leave it in the comments of the video. I'm likely going to be revisiting and expanding on a lot of art tutorials I made on TikTok, as well as making a tutorial on making plush of your OCs, so look forward to those. And with that, thank you for watching.